What's up, sports fans? This is the Lucas Ross Sports Channel, and it's time to continue our 2023 college football predictions for the 2023 college football season. Up next is the Nebraska Cornhuskers team coming off a pretty big disappointing season last year in 2022. I predicted this team to go 8-4 last year, but instead they went 4-8. So it was the kind of backward situation, but it really just wasn't about the overall record. It was just the inconsistency from the coaching staff last year. Of course, Scott Frost got fired in the early part of the year. But you look at the schedule, you look at this Nebraska team for 2023, new era. Matt Rowe coming in now as the head coach. How good of a coach is he going to be for this Nebraska team? Is he able to return this Nebraska program around where it used to be, or is it just the same Nebraska team under the Scott Frost era? But let's look at the schedule this year, and you look at who they play in the non-conference. They'll play Colorado on the road out of the Pac-12. And a lot of people are talking about this game. I mean, it's going to be a pretty interesting one there, interesting non-conference game there on September the 9th. And that is a road game, so that will be a tough one there for the Cornhuskers. Then they'll play Northern Illinois, and then they'll play Louisiana Tech as well. So non-conference schedule, not all too tough for Nebraska. Then outside of the Big Ten West, they'll play Michigan, Michigan State on the road, and Maryland at home. So you get a pretty tough draw there with Michigan out of the Big Ten, East. Obviously, Michigan's got the really talented team. But I think Nebraska can keep this game interesting. We'll find out what happens in this game. But, Michigan State on the road is a pretty tough one. But other than that, not a tough draw there outside of the Big Ten West. But let's get right to the prediction here for this Nebraska team. So this is their first game of the season. They'll start on a Thursday night here on the road at Minnesota on August the 31st. Interesting game to kick off the season here for Nebraska. Obviously, Minnesota, lost a lot of production last year, but this is a road game for Nebraska. I expect it to be really tough, but I expect it to be a really back-and-forth game. This is a tough one for me. Obviously, both of these teams were, kind of an up and down, but, Minnesota had a better season than Nebraska last year. This is kind of a new Nebraska team this year. I think this game is going to go back and forth, but it's a tough one to call for me. Home field advantage does favor the Golden Gophers here. And with that being said, I do like Minnesota here in a close one here over Nebraska to start out the season of 2023. So I got Nebraska starting out 0-1 for 2023. Then there's that game on the road at Colorado. Big game here in the non-conference against a Pac-12 team. And, I know everybody's hyping up for this Colorado team, but really, I just don't see this team being all that good this year and under Coach Sanders' first year. I just don't really see it happening. I know Colorado's got a lot of transfers coming in. They brought in plenty of weapons, but you look at the overall roster, I mean, only 3 returning starters from last year. So many of those guys, into the transfer portal. They're all gone. Colorado's got a lot of transfers, though, coming in, but I just think the talent in Nebraska is more talented than this Colorado team. Like I said, Colorado's going to have a new roster, but maybe they could keep this game close in the first half, but second half, I think Nebraska is going to pull away from the Buffaloes. And with that being said, I like Nebraska here in a close one over Colorado, and I have them getting the win on the road there on September the 9th. That is not going to be an easy game, though, for Nebraska, but I think Nebraska does get it done there at the end of the day on the road at Colorado. Then they'll take care of business against NIU and then Louisiana Tech, so I got Nebraska now improving to 3-1. Then it's home game here against Michigan on September the 30th. I don't think this is going to be a pretty easy win here for Michigan. I kind of expect Nebraska to compete in this game. And you never know. Nebraska could be sitting here in this game 4-0 by the time these two teams match up. I think Nebraska can keep this game close for a little while, but second half, I think that Michigan offense gets things going with the running game, and I think Nebraska does get beat here by the Wolverines. I just think Michigan is just way too talented as well. So with that being said, I think Nebraska does lose here to Michigan here on September the 30th. That drops their record to 3-2. Illinois on the road next year on October the 7th. Interesting game here on the road at Illinois. I expect this game to kind of go back and forth. I think it's kind of similar to the Minnesota game at the start of the season. It's a tough one to call, and it's obviously a very tough place to play if you're Nebraska. And, Illinois and Nebraska actually went back at it in week number 0 a couple years ago. This year, they're going at it on October the 7th. But this one is going to be a pretty interesting game. I kind of expect Nebraska to compete in this game. But at the end of the day, though, it just came down to the home field advantage and obviously a 50-50 game. With that being said, I like Illinois in this game by a pretty close one. So I got Nebraska losing their 3rd game of the season on the road at Illinois. They get a bye week before playing Northwestern here on October the 21st. They do play back-to-back home games here, but Northwestern is a team that, they got beat by them last year in Dublin, Ireland. This year they get them at home, and that's the good news. I mean, Northwestern, though, is a team I kind of don't expect to be all that good this year. If this game was on the road, I think it would be a pretty tougher one for Nebraska, but this is a home game for the Cornhuskers. With that being said, I think they get a pretty solid win over the Wildcats in Northwestern, and that puts Nebraska's record at 4-3. Then it's Purdue at home after that on October the 28th. Big game here in the Big Ten West. I mean, obviously Purdue with a new era coming in. We just don't know how good this Purdue Boilermaker team will be. And I think Nebraska will compete in this game. I think Purdue's got more talent than Nebraska, but with them with all the new faces coming into Purdue this year, it's just going to be hard to tell how good this team is going to be. With that being said, this is a 50-50 game for me. When it usually comes to predicting these Big Ten West matchups, they're honestly just 50-50 games. With that being said, I think Nebraska will win in a pretty close one here over the Boilermakers, and I got Nebraska getting their 5th win here of the season against Purdue. They get to the month of November now. They'll play Michigan State here on the road on November the 4th. Michigan State's kind of a concerning team now these days because they lost their quarterback. That's going to be the big issue for this Michigan State team, but this is still a very tough road game for Nebraska. I mean, Michigan State's going to be a pretty good team. I think they're going to be pretty average on the offensive side of the football. I think this is kind of a defensive battle. I think Michigan State, though, with home field advantage, does get it done here. I think Nebraska loses a pretty close game here on the road at Michigan State. So I got Nebraska now falling to 5-4. Then they'll play Maryland at home on November the 11th. Big game here as well. I think we can kind of expect a shootout here between these two teams. It kind of goes back and forth like the Purdue, Minnesota, and Illinois game. It's just one of those games that comes down to the wire. I think Maryland's going to be a pretty good team this year, but with Nebraska being at home and obviously a tough place to play at Nebraska, this is a 50-50 game for me. With that being said, I do like Nebraska here in a close one over Maryland, and I think Nebraska gets to a bowl game here after that win over Maryland, and that then proves their record as 6-4. Wisconsin on the road next here on November 18th. Big game here between two first-season head coaches going at it. I already done Wisconsin's, prediction video. You can go back and watch that video and already saw that Wisconsin was the pick for me. I think Wisconsin's going to be a pretty good team this year. I just don't see them winning more than 8 games this year, to be honest, because it's a first-year head coach with Luke Fickell. And, both of these teams are kind of fighting for maybe an 8 win perhaps, or maybe a 7th win perhaps as well. But I think this is going to be a pretty good matchup. At the end of the day, though, it just came down to home field advantage for me. With that being said, I do like the Badgers here in a close one over Nebraska, and I got Nebraska now falling to 6-5. Then it's Iowa at home to end things out here on November 24th. This is going to be a pretty interesting matchup. You got Iowa that's going to probably improve on the passing game. Cade McNamara coming in, the transfer from Michigan. How good of a quarterback is he going to be? And I forgot to mention for Nebraska, they brought in some transfers to help them out, including the quarterback Jeff Sims. How good of a quarterback is he going to be? I think Nebraska is kind of better by this time when they get to the month of November. I think they start to kind of, get back to where they need to be in the Big Ten. And this is a rival game between Nebraska and Iowa. You just never know what can happen in this game. And you already saw my Iowa prediction video. I did like Nebraska in this game, and I still do. And with that being said, I'm going to go with Nebraska here to knock off Iowa in a pretty close game. So I got Nebraska finishing 7-5 in 2023. I was going to predict them to go 5-7, but I think this Nebraska team has a shot to go to a bowl game in their first year. But it's very possible they can go 6-6, maybe 5-7. But it's also possible they could probably go 8-4. I think that's their best case scenario is 8-4 for 2023. Worst case scenario will probably be 5-7, but I think that's just a reasonable record for Nebraska, though. The 2023 schedule sets up pretty well. They got a lot of good games at home this year. They get Michigan at home. You got all these other teams at home as well. But 7-5 is my official prediction for the Nebraska Cornhuskers. Let me guys know what you think about this Nebraska team down in the comments below. What do you think their record will be in 2023? And stay tuned here for more sports content videos on the Lucas Ross Sports Channel.